So let's turn our focus now to how a sociologist would look at discrimination based on race and ethnicity. Depending on which theory one bases their examination of discrimination upon, one might frame the problem differently and use a different framework of concepts and principles to understand the various social issues. Recall that critical race theory is going to focus on racism and discrimination as built into the fabric of our society, and that we have to take action to dismantle these problems. We have to overhaul our laws and our policies to make change, but that in and of itself is not enough. We have to understand that we socially construct race and that our social institutions reinforce the outcome of the social construct. This means that unless we not only change the laws, but also overhaul our social institutions, that racism will continue and discrimination will perpetually disadvantage some groups. We have to do more than just change the laws. We have to change our social institutions. Functionalist theorists would focus on the idea that racism either fulfills a societal need or that it's a side effect of something that is a necessary function of society. Functionalists believe that assimilation is good for society and that if minority groups would assimilate into society, that there would no longer be racism and discrimination. Don't forget that functionalists believe that all social institutions have a specific function in society, and that the starting point is that things exist to meet the needs of society. This view is very different from the critical race or conflict theories. Functionalists believe that social stratification is necessary to society because it motivates the minority groups to work harder, thereby benefiting society as a whole. Conflict theorists would focus on the competition for scarce resources and how discrimination allows those that are in power to maintain that source of power and status. Conflict theorists would understand that those in power might not admit that they are trying to maintain that power differential, so they continue to be the dominant class, and they are still perpetuating the laws and policies that will maintain their advantage. A basic premise for conflict theorists is that it's in the dominant group's self-interest to assure that the minority group cannot gain economic or political power. If the dominant group can keep the subordinate, i.e. the minority groups, worried about maintaining racial differences and feed on that strife, then the dominant group has an easier time maintaining their own heightened social status. If you can keep the lower and the middle classes squabbling amongst themselves, then the dominant class can divide and conquer. Conflict theorists realize that the dominant class knows that it's easier to put a target on another minority group's back than it is to understand the complexities of the capitalistic economic structure. The U.S. has numerous civil rights organizations that work to reduce discrimination and prejudicial attitudes. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has been in existence over 100 years. It works to assure that all citizens have their civil liberties guaranteed. They are active in our courts, in our legislatures, and in local communities to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties that the Constitution and the laws of the United States guarantee everyone in this country. The ACLU addresses more than just racial inequalities. They defend people's religious rights, and they are active on LGBTQ issues as well. They are active in reducing mass incarceration and place limits on governmental intrusions into people's lives. The NAACP works to assure that there is political, educational, social, and economic equality of all citizens. The NAACP is active in reducing barriers of racial discrimination, and they work to enact and enforce federal, state, and local laws securing civil rights. They work to inform the public of the adverse effects of racial discrimination and to seek its elimination, and to educate persons as to their constitutional rights. The Mexican American Legal Defense Fund is the nation's leading Latino legal civil rights organization. Often described as a law firm of the Latino community, MALDEF promotes social change through advocacy, communications, community education, and litigation in the areas of education, employment, immigrant rights, and political access. The U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights works to assure that discrimination does not take place in the areas of employment, education, and housing. While discrimination may be pervasive in society and is difficult to eradicate, these various organizations and branches of the government work to try and equalize the playing field. So we've talked about prejudice and discrimination and tried to understand a little bit more about what are the root causes, what are the historical aspects of prejudice and discrimination, and what are we doing in our social world to try to eliminate those problems. We're going to turn next to thinking about ideologies, and we're going to talk about the dominant American ideologies that have been a historical part of our social world.